Welcome to Workplace Psychology with Dr. Martha Grajdek. I'm Dr. Martha Grajdek. This podcast examines a wide variety of work-related issues through the lens of industrial and organizational psychology. And while many of the topics discussed here may be seen as intended for white-collar employees and their employers, in reality, the ideas presented here are applicable across organizations and industries. Additionally, many of the topics discussed here may be applicable outside of the workplace. I encourage you to examine what's presented here, apply what makes sense to you, and simply discard the rest. In today's busy, ever-changing, fast-paced world, activism is something that seems to be on the rise recently. When it comes to activism, this is something that can be present, seen, and felt on many levels in different ways. That's why it's so important to address activism as it may appear and be present at the workplace. Employee activism seems to be a trend where more and more employees are speaking out on current events, on global news, and on what's happening within the organization. Employees are speaking out on the topics of employee treatment, employee rights, trends within their organization, and even their industries. Considering this increasing trend or practice, it's important to recognize activism as it appears in the workplace and to understand what may be motivating it. There could be numerous motivators behind employee activism, from purpose to the alignment of values to social justice. Activism can be fueled by a number of different things, and those mentioned are by no means an all-inclusive list, but rather a small sample of what may motivate employee activism at work. It's no surprise that in a fast-paced world where changes are frequent and plentiful, individuals find themselves speaking out, taking sides, and committing to causes. What we must realize is that even if individuals' activism takes place mainly outside of the workplace, this is something that can very much affect the employee, their workplace experience, their performance at work, and to some extent, sometimes to a large extent, the organization itself. Organizations must understand what drives their employees, whether that's how they're motivated to perform at work or what fuels any and all activism that employees may be committed to. An organization will automatically need to assess risk, reputation, the cost of association with the activist employee, but also the potential or the opportunities that may come with employee activism. This is why it's critical to point out that activism can come in many flavors, so to speak. Sometimes it may be neutral, other times it may present tremendous opportunities for both the employee and the organization for forward movement, for growth, for improvement, and in some cases, it may seem to have negative effects on the organization or on the employee within that organization. It's not difficult to understand why employee activism should be an important topic of conversation and an important consideration for organizations. Considering that employee activism is here, it's real, and it's not going away anytime soon. And given the potential effects that it may have on the organization itself, for better, for worse, or in a neutral way, it's important that employees and employers have an open channel of communication, one that is constructive and productive. A constructive dialogue will be one that clarifies both sides and their positions, that examines the potential effects or results associated with said activism. It may also suggest guidelines or provide acceptable parameters. The responsibility on employers and employees is an equal one, in that where employers have to be aware of employee activism and have to provide open channels of communications where productive and constructive conversations take place, employees must be cognizant of what their activism may bring to the employer by association. Even if employees engage in activities beyond the workplace, outside of work, if such activities were to hurt their employer, the employee has the responsibility of considering his or her actions. That is not to say that employee activism should be dictated by the organization where they're employed, but a certain level of consideration must be expected. In the same way that an employer may provide guidelines or expectations of what would be acceptable for the organization as far as employee activism goes, it would be difficult for an employee to accept a situation where the employer absolutely limits or forbids certain types of activism and related activities or behaviors. The bottom line is that both sides have a responsibility, and both sides must be respectful of one another. The answer is not to curb all opinions, all activism, and forsake speaking out on important topics. The goal is for both sides to be open, honest, and constructive in finding a common ground. Of course, the reality is such that there will be times when the beliefs or convictions of an employee are not aligned with what the organization wishes to promote or be associated with or will want to see or even allow. Those are difficult situations, and sometimes some soul searching may be required as a means of finding the right answers. If, for example, an employee is passionate on a topic that is the polar opposite of where their employer stands on that topic, it may be time to reconsider that partnership between employee and employer. Fortunately, most of the time, when open communications are combined with honesty and the intention of finding common ground, both employer and employee can find that happy medium, a set of parameters within which both can exist. As important as employee activism and speaking out is, when it comes to the workplace, we have to remember the reality of balancing free expression with business objectives. Those two cannot be at odds for very long, and should aim to not be at odds at all. As this episode comes to an end, let's review what was discussed. Today's world beckons us to speak up, speak out, and embrace activism as part of life. And this is a reality for many. But as passionate as individuals can be, they do have the responsibility to consider how their expressions, how their choices related to that employee activism may affect their employer or even the industry in which they work. The partnership between employee and employer must come together to consider employee activism. By keeping open channels of communication where honesty and a reasonable approach from both is always in consideration, more often than not, employee activism can exist within an organization, its purpose and its goals. Or employees may be driven by things such as purpose, alignment of values, and justice. Employers have to consider things such as reputation, risks, and even opportunities. It's only through cooperation that employee activism can be both successful and satisfying for all engaged. As this week unfolds, I encourage you to consider employee activism and what it means to you, whether you're an employee or the employer, whether you are in a management or leadership position or a non-management or non-leadership position. What does employee activism mean to you? Are you someone who speaks out freely and passionately on a topic or a group of topics? Do you consider how your actions and your choices affect others, including your employer? And as an employer, do you allow for the freedom of expression as long as it does not interfere with the organization's purpose and goals? Remember, open channels of honest communications can help to find a common ground for employee and employer. For those of you who experience this podcast in an audio-only version, I encourage you to check out YouTube, specifically my channel, Stress Free with Dr. G, where you can find the video version of this podcast. While you're there, check out some of the other videos. They focus on stress management. Stress Free with Dr. G can be found on YouTube, and the link for that is in the description below. Thank you for joining me today. Please subscribe to this podcast. I look forward to seeing you here again next time. Until then, I wish you joy and well-being.